Alright, what is up guys, and welcome back to the channel. You're watching the daily series of Nwadei MMA, where I give you my thoughts, but more importantly ask for you guys' thoughts when we talk about things going on in the MMA community. Guys, today it's not going to be your traditional ultimate breakdown. This breakdown is going to be a little bit different, but it's going to be a lot shorter than the ultimate breakdown versions. If you are new to the channel, we are 100% on breakdowns, but only 70% on predictions, so choose our predictions wisely. At the end of the day, it's fighting and it's hard to predict, but with that being said, you could be sure I'm gonna break it down fully. So if you're still watching this video, it's very easy to support the content. Just give this video a like and comment your thoughts down below, and if you would like to join the Nwadei MMA family, go ahead and subscribe and you'll receive more content like this one in the future. Let's get right into it. Alright guys, so Alexandre Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. This matchup kind of came out of nowhere, am I right? I mean, if we look at this matchup, Alexandre Pantoja has beaten almost every flyweight that's in the top 10, right? And he's getting this new wave of guys, mainly young fighters, guys who just got into the UFC or guys who just got to the top in the flyweight division, because if we don't remember, a couple years ago, this flyweight division was about to get shut down. This was back when Demetrius Johnson was getting traded for Ben Askren, and Henry Cejudo vacated that belt and went up to bantamweight, and there was all this stuff happening. And then Brandon Moreno and Davison Figueiredo saved the division, right? However, looming in the wakes was this guy named Alexandre Pantoja, who had already really beat a lot of the top contenders. However, he just hadn't ever gotten that title shot. And now when we look at Pantoja, he is the reigning defending champion. He got his belt from Brandon Moreno. That was the third time he beat Brandon Moreno. He defended his belt against Brandon Royval. That was the second time he beat Brandon Royval. And the UFC pulls out Steve Erceg up out of nowhere. Now, while Steve Erceg doesn't have a big name, it doesn't mean he's not a great fighter. I mean, to be fair, a lot of fighters are great and they don't have the name, or they don't get the recognition that they deserve. Steve Erceg is one of those guys. Steve Erceg is probably the most dangerous fight for Alexandre Pantoja and the way he's been fighting, other than maybe a guy like Askar Askarov, and I'm hesitant to say, but maybe Amir Alba, but it still stands. It's hard to find a style that Pantoja really hasn't beaten, and by looking at the surface of this matchup, a lot of people are choosing Steve Erceg to beat Pantoja, and you know, I was too. But before we get into our picks, I'm gonna break this one down. So first, looking at Alexandre Pantoja and his style based off of his past fights, his last 3 fights were against Brandon Moreno, Brandon Royval, and Alex Perez. He finished Alex Perez by submission. He went to decision with both Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno. And if you look at those body types in the last 2 matchups that he fought, they were both bigger than him. They were both long bodies for flyweight division, and so was Steve Erceg. So a lot of people are talking about the size of Steve Erceg. Meanwhile, Pantoja's already kind of fought similar styles. Of course, no fighter's the same. No fighter's gonna bring the exact same style, but body type wise, wrestle jitsu wise, striking wise, he's been able to solve all these puzzles. And the way he's been able to do it and his style based off of those fights is a little bit kind of like his name, the Cannibal. He fights kind of like that. He likes to flurry forward in blitzes. He looks for a lot of awkward angles on his hooks and uppercuts, and then he'll run you into an overhand, a left hook, or even that backside roundhouse that he likes to throw a lot. He'll throw it to the body or he'll throw it to the head, but everything he throws striking wise is to either push you backwards, catch you sitting in and trying to shell up, or to strike you off of the break or get you to the cage and continue his grappling from there. He's really good wrestling, which is something you don't see from a lot of jiu-jitsu guys. His jiu-jitsu is next level. And the last but the icing on the cake for Alexandre Pantoja and his style is he's one tough motherfucker, bro. This dude can endure some punishment. He's never been finished, not once in his career. We've seen him rocked, maybe rarely. He never really shows it when he's rocked or hurt or anything like that. Generally, he keeps his chin tucked, so he's never really getting hit clean like that. Everything's kind of on his forehead and around his eyes. You see he has a lot of scar tissue there, but something that he's had a problem with in his previous fights has been keeping that 5-round pace. His style's been a little bit spurty, and that's actually what Steve Erceg has been talking about taking advantage of, being able to dictate that pace. And so if we're talking about keys to victory for Alexandre Pantoja to win, we've got to talk about not only what his coaches have been talking about, but also from what I see in his style. Now, Pantoja's not the type to really commit to a strong jab because he's 5'5", while all these other guys he's fighting are 5'8", 5'7", and definitely have longer reaches than him. So working around that method is the Dutch style of kickboxing, which we've seen him employ in not only the last Brandon Moreno fight, but also in the second Brandon Moreno fight, where he butchered Brandon Moreno's legs by setting it up with a lot of hooks. The Dutch style of kickboxing. So in saying this, I think he needs to employ this same strategy with Steve Erceg for his first key to victory, because Steve Erceg is a sniper and he likes to back out of range and then enter quickly, or he'll interrupt your timing with his very strong and slick jab, which is why you need to be getting your head off the center line while you're throwing those hooks and then following up low to get him thinking about the levels and get him defending. If Steve Erceg's able to let off his attacks in fluid motion, he's able to find his flow state, it's going to be a hard guy to beat. Even though we haven't seen much from him, you can at least tell that much, and that's what everyone's seeing. They're seeing these fights where he's been able to enter that flow state, he's been able to snipe people, be very accurate, and they're assuming that that's something he's going to be able to do to Pantoja. However, I think if Pantoja is able to implement this Dutch style of kickboxing, it'll keep his head off the center line, won't be getting hit with as many straight punches, and it'll help him come forward, which leads into our second key to victory against Steve Erceg is that I think that Pantoja also needs to attack the body of Steve Erceg, not only with that roundhouse kick that he likes to throw off of the break, but I think attacking the body with his hands, boxing the body, is going to stop Steve Erceg from being able to just lean back out of range while people headhunt. That's generally how he's able to snipe people, and that's generally what gets people into trouble going against Steve Erceg. Not to mention that Steve Erceg likes to level change, and that's how he likes to manage and control the range. So boxing the body keeps your level low. It helps you to pre-deny those takedowns, and will also help to keep Steve Erceg's posture forward. That way you can hit his head as well and leave openings for his head. And lastly, for Alexandre Pantoja's third key to victory, not only is it important to strike off of the break of the clinches, but it's also important to impose your will wrestling wise. Now, Steve Erceg, while he might seem like a striker based off of his past couple of fights, he's actually more of a grappler, and his wrestling is honestly better than his jiu-jitsu. His wrestling enables him to not only control the striking, but it also enables him to be really good in scrambles. So I think if Alexandre Pantoja is going to grapple, he needs to really impose his dominance wrestling, and he can't stop early on those takedowns. He's going to have to go through and finish those takedowns until he's on top. If there's one thing we've seen from Pantoja, is that even when he gets tired, he'll still keep pushing, he'll still keep fighting. He's not going to give up, he's not going to quit. And I think that if he can slow down his pace, like the coaches were telling him in the corner, this might be a different fight than what people expect. Now, on the other side, with Steve Erceg, his style based off his past 3 fights. So he's only had 3 fights in the UFC. David Dvorak, Alessandro Costa, which is a very good win, and then Matthew Schnell. Now, he chinned Matthew Schnell. That one kind of happens. Matt Schnell does have decent boxing. He has really good jiu-jitsu. However, the fight never really got to the ground. Matt Schnell was just okay sitting there boxing with him. He actually caught Steve Erceg a little bit with a couple of left hooks, which is an opening that Pantoja is going to look to exploit. However, staying in that pocket as long as he did, he was able to get sniped and clipped by Steve Erceg, which ended up giving Steve the knockout. Against Alessandro Costa, we also saw something that Steve Erceg is really good at. It's that long cross. He makes it very skinny. Usually you see a traditional cross like this and it comes a little wide, while Steve, he keeps that elbow tucked and he just turns it right over, so it comes right into that window, right in between the guard, and it clips people and hurts people. His length mixed with his timing and speed makes the power just appear. Steve also has really good boxing, really good awareness and management of range. He uses his takedowns very well to not only close that gap for offense, but for defense as well. And we've seen this in every single one of his fights. One thing we haven't seen is him show a lot of different kicking variety or kicking techniques. He does attack the legs, he will attack the body, Every now and again he'll throw a head kick maybe, but he mainly likes to stick to the wrestle boxing, and why not when he's phenomenal at it? I know people were making a lot of hype about how he was able to out-grapple Alessandro Costa, but I don't really think that was the case. I think mainly he was able to out-scramble Alessandro Costa. If you look at the reason he was able to mount Alessandro so easily is because he had rocked and hurt Alessandro Costa right before doing it. Other than that, Alessandro Costa really had the better of the grappling exchanges. I mean, he got to Steve Erceg's back multiple times. If you let Alexandre Pantoja get there, it's not going to be a good night. However, being the wrestler that he is, he was able to find these little windows to make Alessandro overcommit to these positions, and he was able to slip out backdoor and all these other little nifty escapes. And the last part of his style that really needs to be talked about is his confidence. I mean, we've heard him talk about it in interviews, that what he sees wrong in the way people fight Alexandre Pantoja is that they let him dictate the pace. He says he's going to dictate the pace. He says that he's very confident in his abilities, and he is very aware that he's not scared to grapple with Alexandre Pantoja, and not being scared to do something is half of the battle of doing it, right? But I think that Pantoja does have the better grappling, so I don't think he should be grappling with Pantoja. That'll put him more, that'd make Pantoja more comfortable in this fight, rather than if Pantoja can't get a takedown, he uses his wrestling to defend all of Pantoja's takedown and strike with him. I think that'd be more beneficial for Steve Erceg. Now, going into Steve Erceg's keys to victory in order to win this fight against Alexandre Pantoja, I don't think that Steve Erceg should be putting 100% behind all of his punches. I think that the speed and the accuracy are 10 times more important, especially in these 4-ounce gloves. And similar to what we saw in his fight with Alessandro Costa, just touching him and touching that guard, we saw Brandon Moreno have a lot of success with his jab and straight punches against Alexandre Pantoja, but he wasn't able to hurt him. I think Steve Erceg has a little bit more power than Brandon Moreno, but he doesn't throw as many shots as Brandon Moreno. So it'll be interesting to see this style, and it'll be interesting to see if he could get Alexandre Pantoja to open up. However, what a lot of people don't realize is that when Pantoja does enter into the pocket, and he does use that little blitz and Tasmanian devil style. So while I think Steve Erceg should use straight punches, his second key to victory would actually be a knee right up the middle. I think that Brandon Royval actually had a lot of success with that knee to the body, but bringing it up through the middle and actually landing it on his face instead of his body would actually serve better than attacking him to the body. Like I said, Alexandre Pantoja relies on those blitzes a little bit too much, and if Steve Erceg can catch him focusing on that boxing range too much, or maybe trying to just box into some takedowns like we saw him do with Brandon Royval, that knee up the middle is going to be there every time. Plus, I think that even if the knee gets caught, Steve Erceg is so good in the scrambles, and he's so big for the division that it'll be easier for him to scramble and out wrestle Alexandre Pantoja if it happens to be in a scramble. Now, if Pantoja gets a clean first shot on Steve Erceg, I don't know how those scrambles are gonna go, but I know if there's a knee interrupting that shot, I think it'll go Steve Erceg's way. And the last key to victory for Steve Erceg is I think he just needs to be very patient. It's the first time he's gonna be going 5 rounds in the UFC against such a high-level competitor. Letting Alexandre Pantoja make the same mistake that he's been making in his last couple of title fights by coming out super hard could work against him. However, if Steve Erceg notices that Pantoja is being more patient, that'll actually allow him to push the pace more. I don't think Alexandre Pantoja is as good going backwards, but only time is gonna tell. So ultimately, and moving on into my official prediction, I think that if Alexandre Pantoja makes the same mistake that his coaches were talking about, coming out too hard, not using his experience as they called it in his last fight with Royval, and maybe getting too amped up by the crowd and burning that gas tank a little too early, I think Steve Erceg is going to get the win, because I think that it'll allow Steve Erceg to then dictate the rest of the fight after Alexandre Pantoja takes that first deep breath. However, if Alexandre Pantoja comes out and he's very patient, he's using this Dutch style, he's using the kickboxing, I think all those keys to victory I just mentioned will be the reason why Alexandre Pantoja wins. Because at the end of the day, I do think his grappling is better. I do think his offensive wrestling is better. He chains takedowns very well. His back takes are unlike a lot that we've ever seen. I mean, him and Aljamain Sterling have the best back takes in the entire UFC, and I've seen Steve Erceg get his back taken before by Alessandro Costa. Matter of fact, multiple times in that fight. Another thing that I think is working against Steve Erceg is the lack of experience. I mean, he's fought tough guys, don't get me wrong, and he's been doing it on short notice almost every single time. But the wars that Pantoja has been through maybe can work against him, maybe can have a negative impact on the durability of Pantoja, or it'll be something that Pantoja has seen before, because I do think that they're gonna crack. I do think they're gonna run into each other's power, and I do think this is gonna be a very fun fight to watch. So that's my official breakdown for the fight. If I had to make a bet on this fight, I would take the over 2.5 rounds. This is a flyweight fight, and I do think that Alexandre Pantoja is gonna come out more patient. I think Steve Erceg is gonna want to see how many rounds he could take this thing, because I do think that he really believes that he has the better gas tank and the better pace control than Alexandre Pantoja. So I think betting over 2.5 rounds is a very likely bet that will happen. However, other bets that I would take would be the over on takedowns attempted or takedowns landed. I do think there's going to be a good variety of takedowns on both sides. I'd say at least 4 to 5 takedowns between the two of them are going to be landed in this fight. If you look at Pantoja's fight with Brandon Moreno, I think it's a very similar style, because Brandon Moreno also has that wrestle jiu-jitsu style, and you remember how many takedowns were being fed in that one. Pantoja was relentless with the takedowns. He landed 6 out of 11 takedowns in that fight, and Brandon Moreno landed 2 of his own takedowns. And in the Royval fight, he landed 8 takedowns against Royval. So that's something that you can definitely expect. Against Alessandro Costa, Steve Erceg shot 8 takedowns, landed only 1 of them, while Alessandro Costa had 1 out of 6 takedowns. So like I said, there's going to be a lot of takedowns, a lot of grappling exchanges. You can expect all of that, which is another reason why I would take the over 2.5 rounds, and maybe even over 3.5 rounds as well. That one's a little bit more risky though, because I do think that if the gas tank does have a factor to play, that there could be a finish around that 3rd to 4th round mark. However, if you are taking the money line, I think Steve Erceg is a good bet to make at a plus 195 underdog. I'd say that's a pretty safe bet, because these guys are very even. Of course, Alexandre Pantoja has more experience. He's had longer time in the game, longer time training than Steve Erceg, so of course he's going to have better attributes like that. But I think based off of everything I said, if you think that Steve Erceg is going to be able to push that pace or outlast Alexandre Pantoja's early blitzes, or he's going to be able to catch him off the break or get dirty with that clinch like he likes to do, that money line, take Steve Erceg. Parlay that with a Vitor Petrino or Michel Pereira fight, and I think you can earn yourself some good money there. However, with that being said, thank you guys for watching the content. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Oh, and don't forget to watch my latest episode of the Will vs. the Way podcast, where we uncover some questionable things about John Jones, talk about the MMA guru, exposing him, and so much more about the MMA community. And this is not the last breakdown we'll be making for UFC 301, so stay tuned for the Jose Aldo Jonathan Martinez breakdown as well. Peace.